am your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We are back from the 35th Annual American Atheists Convention, which was held in Atlanta, and we had a great time there. We actually have an interview with a brief interview with Richard Dawkins coming up, as well as some other people. And one of the people that I was very fortunate enough to meet there was the author Jeff J. Henley, who authored this book, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, A Lawyer's Case for Disbelief in God. And we are very happy to have him as our guest. Jeff?
How are you?
You tell me that you have been a practicing attorney for 12 years, is that correct?
That's right. I was licensed, actually, in 97, so we're coming up on 12 years.
And in the state of Texas, is that correct?
That's right.
Now, first of all, I just want to say I think it's very interesting because I'm in the process of reading at least 20 books. A lot of them deal with the case for disbelief, or the failure to make a case against evolution, or that kind of thing, and the vast majority of them are done from some kind of philosophical position or some kind of scientific position, all which are very important and correct. But this is the first book I've seen where we're dealing with the issue of God, or making the case for disbelief in God from a purely legal standpoint based on the laws of the United States of America, which some people claim is supposed to be a Christian nation.
Right.
And so, but before we kind of get into that, I just want to, could I have a little of your, I know you go into it in the book, but get some of your religious background and...
I grew up in a relatively, probably mildly religious home. My mother married twice, and when we were young, we went to a Methodist church. It was New World Methodist in Garland, Texas, and we would don the navy blazer with considerable resistance and try to restrain ourselves while we played tic-tac-toe on little things. But no, I don't have any. Unlike, say, Catholics or say Muslims, I don't have any real significant anecdotes of religious repression that made me angry.
Right. You don't have no horror stories.
Not really. I upset a girl in high school by that time when I had a lot of doubts, but she was the daughter of an Episcopal minister. But
upsetting girls in high school is a religious experience in and of itself. but that's a completely different theme. You'll have to come back to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm still upsetting women.
That's another show. Different channel.
But no, we did the sort of attend church at a very young age for a short period of time. And then after that second divorce, really there was no church attendance for a long time. But then in high school, I made a concrete effort on my own to go to a number of different churches. It frankly kind of began with sort of at the prodding of one of my teachers, who was a guy by the name of Frank Bridwell. He's a history teacher, a very smart man, and he had seen me reading Sartre's No Exit.
Oh boy!
And he kind of snickered a little bit because, well, for one thing, students in Garland really weren't reading that much anyway. But this was in between class or before class, and then he made some comments and he suggested that I come to his church, and I went into some of his Sunday school classes and read some of the theology, and then decided I was going to start looking at a large number of different churches to find something that I thought was compatible. But you always ended up having lingering doubts. Now, I did get baptized in 1993 in a Southern Baptist church, very conservative place. And that was probably about as much of a ritual as I can ever say that ever underwent, and it's just. But I never had that sort of subjective conviction that you always. I mean, I've always had doubts, and then for a good 10 years or so, I would have considered myself thoroughly agnostic and more likely atheist. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, the more comparative mythology, the more science I read, the more the practice of law did a number of things for me, because you really start looking at just certain things that we accept as a priori or afterward, and then you go back and you read the Bible again. and it just requires way too much suspension of disbelief.
So it was less it was less of a case of you're actually kind of coming to the crossroads as much as it was the more you travel down the road, the more you learn. Right?
Actually, you know what? I would say exactly that. Lee Strobel in his Case for Christ and Case for Creator.
I have not read that yet. But
yeah,
I'm not going to comment on it.
Well, they're pretty disingenuous because his whole rhetorical style is to go and interview theologians and other theists and throw them softballs that they then smack over the fence.
Yeah.
And then he acts like it was a major epiphany or that he's been thoroughly persuaded. And but I will have to say that my own exploration was probably on the other side, that I literally kept on trying to give Christianity every benefit of the doubt. And then finally, when you go back, and the most damning thing for me particularly really wasn't even the science, because I'd read Father Teilhard Cardan and, trying to massage, belief with evolution and some of these other things that the Catholic Church does. But the things that were just, you couldn't get over was the nature of Scripture itself.
Yeah.
I mean, just all the problems, both evidentiary, both in terms of what I talk about in terms of due process. There's no calibrated sense of punishment. I mean, God embraces, the punishment of innocence. When our whole system of due process in this country requires not merely a bad person, but a person who has done a specific act that you can prove beyond reasonable doubt.
Right.
And in fact, before you can even charge that person, you need probable cause.
That's right.
You can't just say, well, he's bad in general.
Right.
You have to be able to identify specific articulable facts.
Right.
And original sin doesn't do that.
Right. And also our court system is that in extreme cases, the judge has a right to set aside a guilty verdict if he or she doesn't believe that the verdict. The evidence supported the verdict.
Well, that's more like in civil cases, judgment notwithstanding the verdict. But yeah, you can be acquitted. You can have a conviction overturned. You can even have secondary appeals, and then you can file writs of habeas corpus beyond that. And as we've probably seen in recency, although I think in New York you guys don't have the same problem that we do in Texas. We've been having a fair number of people getting exonerated 10, 15 years later with DNA evidence. Our local district attorneys had a very popular project called the Project Innocence Project, where they've literally taken the time to go back and ascertain if the person was guilty based upon DNA evidence. Because frankly, in vast instances, there is no DNA evidence to collect. But it definitely was an article of good faith to actually do that.
Right. So you were anyway. So the funny thing that you mentioned is that it seems to me almost like you came to your atheism and your view of your legalistic view of the Bible kind of gradually, incrementally over the years, just by making yourself aware and going back and I guess checking what you were told against what you know. Right.
And what I talk about at the beginning, I talk about mythology and alibis, because when you're a prosecutor, when you first start out prosecuting, you're in the misdemeanor section and you see you're in this back room and you've got piles of cases that you're flipping through and you're making a determination whether to charge somebody or not.
Right.
Because a person is taken and arrested. There's actually kind of two phases of getting charged. You're charged by the police.
Yes.
They had probable cause. And then we make a determination, is this a case that we can prove or not? Because sometimes you can see it's like, oh, the cop didn't do these things. Let's just dismiss it now. We're not going to waste any time. Or maybe we'll send it back and say, hey, can you collect some more information so that we have something that's a lot stronger.
Now you're not a prosecutor now, are you?
No. I was. DAs don't make much money, frankly.
I was hard to believe, but
I was a DA for 4 years, which most prosecutors are. It's about 2 to 5 years, and then they switch sides. Most of them go into criminal defense.
Right.
I do a tiny bit of criminal defense. I do mostly personal injury, real estate transactions, and other things. But what you would do is when you're an intake lawyer, you're sitting there going through stacks and stacks and stacks. I mean, literally thousands of cases, and you're making the determination, am I going to charge this guy or not? And in the vast majority of the instances, maybe 90% or more, you do. But in the process, you're reading all these different stories, and they're funny. I mean, they're just absolutely hysterical, the kinds of exculpatory claims that these defendants will come up with. And it's exactly like Scripture, because no matter what, there's just this compulsion, this congenital desire to explain your present circumstances, no matter how stupid.
Right. And also when you take that on a cultural level, societal level, I think we're all, certainly most of us, are inculcated from the day of birth with the unquestionable fact that God exists, period.
Right.
And it informs the way we collectively look at the world, the way we look at ourselves. And so the whole idea is that that's the primary, that's like the prime directive, and no matter what happens, no matter what the evidence shows, somehow it must be explained in light of this supernatural belief.
Absolutely. And the thing is, even in going back to the criminal setting, even with Fifth Amendment privileges, which afford a defendant the right to just sit there, shut up, and do nothing, they still want to talk.
Sure.
They still want to tell a story. And again, sometimes the stories are just awful.
Yeah.
And they'll borrow stories, and we see that in the syncretism in religion, Jesus and Mithras and Osiris.
Yeah, and you do actually give a history of a brief history of
I do.
Western belief, including the Code of Hammurabi, which is very important to us.
Right. I talk about how much. I mean, the reason why I bring up Hammurabi so much is, Roy Moore and a variety of other judges and Christian activists talk about the Ten Commandments as this bedrock of American and Anglo-American jurisprudence. It's not.
Right.
They also talk about it as this sort of, natural revelation that was the first and foremost.
Right, that there was no morality or decency before that.
Right. When Hammurabi's Code was several hundred years before.
Almost 1,000.
And it was extremely comprehensive.
Yes.
They even had, Hammurabi even had clauses for what to do with acts of physician malpractice. And what to do if a home builder made a home that was defective and killed and caved in and killed. The remedies would make a lot of people pretty unsettled. But
I don't think you can understand I don't think you have a reasonable background for our system of jurisprudence without talking about Hammurabi, without exploring Hammurabi, as well as the Greeks and
Right.
And their
and frankly, much of our law, much of our common law, a lot of it came from the German Anglo-Saxon blood
English
feud.
common law.
Right. Well, but that even preceded the English common law, because so much of it is just pure and simple sort of discoveries over time that we have to prevent certain kinds of trespasses. And what I mean by trespass, I'm not simply talking about tramping on somebody else's property. I'm talking about any sort of infringement upon another person's physical and bodily space, or his land, or his chattels, or anything that is a part of that individual's person. And over time, we've just add additional refinements. And sometimes we have, remarkable sea changes in authority, but for the most part, our legal system has been an evolutionary process.
Right. One of the things kind of picked up where we kind of started off before is in your chapter 7 is entitled "God Presumes Guilt," and one of the paragraphs is the logic of original sin is alien to American law. And that's certainly basically if someone accuses you of breaking God's law, then you're more or less stuck. I guess I don't know. Enlighten me if I'm wrong here.
You're done.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no right of appeal. There's no recourse to a secondary tribunal. There's a presumption in the very beginning, and that's why I talk about presumption of guilt, because again, they maintain, assuming you, well, literalists certainly maintain, and that's a very significant number of people in our country,
Yeah.
certainly maintain that you actually have to have the grace of Jesus Christ to, get out of or exit from the fallen world that Adam and Eve left.
Right.
Well, again, I mean, that suggests, ab initio, that you are guilty upon conception, or perhaps,
I mean, what's up with that?
Right.
I mean, what kind of God of justice?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is, I will say this, I think the ancient Hebrews actually, they did have some kind of court system, and depending on the crime, you needed 2 witnesses and that kind of thing. But whatever that was, there's no way to get out from under original sin.
No. Not at all.
I mean,
and Aquinas and Augustine tried to come up with some remedies too, because people started coming forward and going, hey, if we do this, then Moses and all those wonderful patriarchs, they're going to be burning in hell. Hey, if we do this, and all of our Aristotle and Socrates and all those wonderful Greco-Roman thinkers we like so much, they're going to be burning in hell.
Right.
Hey, if we do this, then all these infants, they're going to be burning in hell. So then they start fashioning, kind of like good lawyers, they start coming up with, well, okay, why don't we manufacture something called limbo or purgatory?
That's very interesting.
And these are the kinds of, those are legal fictions. Because what they recognize is, look, God, this doctrine is just awful.
Well, people complained.
Right.
No,
exactly.
that's true. I think around in the era of St. Augustine, you had parents. The infant mortality rate was much, much higher than it is now.
Right.
And you had parents complaining to their priests and their parish people, and they passed on this information. Well, what about my child that died in childbirth who didn't sin at all? Or
the one that didn't make it to the church.
Didn't want to make it to church, or, was struck down on the way to church, or died of a disease. So, so they had to do some fast tracking, some retrofitting, I guess.
Absolutely. And what we call that in the law is a subsequent remedial measure.
Right.
And it's particularly useful in the brand of law, or the field of law that I'm in, and that's personal injury and product liability litigation. So, for example, if I come over to your home and you don't repair a step, and I trip and fall and I break my leg, I want to take a picture of, frankly, I want to take several pictures, but one is of the broken step, but I want to take a picture of your repairs.
Yeah.
To say that, see, Dennis, he had a broken step, and now he went and fixed it. He's trying to cover it up. Well, in law, that repair is not, I cannot introduce that into evidence. Because the policy is that the worry is that if landowners and product makers are punished by changes, improvements that they made, then maybe you may not fix your step.
Right.
But in this case, that what we know is the same policy rationale for commenting on it are not there.
Right.
What we're recognizing is, look, you guys changed this because you knew the previous one was bad.
Right.
And then now, so it's like, here you gave us one story, we've done this, it doesn't check out. Okay, well, you got another one? Let's look at that one too.
Right.
Well, guess what? Now it's wrong with that one.
So if I fix a step, I'm in effect acknowledging that it was broken in the first place.
Absolutely.
There was something wrong with it in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another chapter is called chapter 8 is called God Does Not Serve Notice.
Fundamental for any lawsuit that you ever have is, if you get a divorce, or if you're going to evict somebody, you have to go and serve personally or through certified mail, but really it's personal service. I mean, we've all seen these films where, some protagonist is, angered when that process server comes in and says, Mr. Jones, yeah, that's me. You've been served.
Yeah.
And the reason why, there's a very good reason why we want this level of personal service, because we want people to answer lawsuits. We don't want people to say, oh, it was lost in the mail. I didn't get it.
Right.
Oh, it was, I didn't check my email today.
Right.
We insist on personal service because you want to be able to walk into court and say, because if the defendant doesn't show up, the plaintiff wants to go, hey, judge, I'm ready to take a default judgment, then the judge is going to, the very first thing out of his mouth will, did you serve the defendant?
Yeah.
And could you show me the citation that proves, or the return of service that proves that you served? Because our system firmly believes that you have to tell them what you're going to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we don't want deprivations taking place willy-nilly where no one knows, that they've been sued, or whether it's for
Right.
child support or child custody, or in the case of criminality, somebody just pulls you out of your house and, puts you in the Bastille and says, hey, what did I do? Oh, we'll get to you later.
Yeah, no, you have a right to prepare a defense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
And so in terms of religion, how does, God serve? We don't get personal service. We get vague. And the other thing about serving a notice, it has to be clear.
Yes.
It can't be some vague idea, or I can't charge you with theft in something,
right.
and then you get down to the courthouse, surprise, you're on trial for murder.
Right.
It has to be something that's very clear, intelligible, and understandable. It can't be something that's written in a metaphor, or
That's
a
right.
riddle,
That's right.
or a puzzle.
Right.
And that's one of the problems about Scripture. It's like, the literalists, of course, well, yeah, they're giving you notice if you can read Aramaic or all that other stuff.
Right.
But the people who talk about, well, it's a metaphor or it's a parable or a notice, well, when I serve somebody with a lawsuit, it's unambiguous.
Yeah, it's
they know
not a metaphor.
they know what I want.
It ain't poetry.
No, it's very clear. We
Yeah.
think that you did this, and this is why we're coming after you. Even, and that's just, and every sort of lawsuit that gets filed in religious, the placement of a religious commandment or nativity scenes, they don't operate on metaphors.
Right.
If you want to get the Ten Commandments in a court removed, or if you want to get it in place, you have to do these things.
Interesting, because I'm one of the books I'm reading now is called Atheist Universe by David Mills, and he deals with the with this notion that some of the more liberal believers, the liberal fundamentalists, creationists, whatever, have come up with this idea of that in the Bible, a day actually means an age, a longer period of time, and he makes note of the fact that until science actually proved, the way the age of the universe, for instance, nobody before that was using that kind of metaphor. Nobody before the scientific discoveries about the age of the universe and the age of the earth was using that. And so, and he goes on to point out other things as to how they kind of try to use the metaphor angle.
And there are a number of problems with that. For one thing, I talk about the Quran doing that specifically in this book, because they talk about the yuan and it being anywhere from 1,000 years to 50,000 years, and there's just a lot of ambiguity. Well, there are a number of problems with that, because from that metaphor, they use that to apply our 7-day week. So they proscribe certain activities taking place on either Saturday or Sunday. So if you think that the time is a year or 2 years or an epoch, then why are we doing these things on 24-hour interim periods during our solar year?
Yeah.
Clearly, it's more than a metaphor, because they're attaching, they're fixating certain practices to occur on certain days.
Right. Well, and that's why when you say that the law has to be very, very specific as possible, you're not going to do it by say, well, just to give you an example, prophecy. It's always very vague, and there's people are starting to say that Nostradamus predicted 9/11, or that 9/11, you can find predictions for it in the Bible. But you'd think that if God wanted us to know these things badly enough, it would have been in the Scripture that on September 11th, 2001, 2 flying machines were going to fly into a tower and 3,000 people were going to be killed.
Right.
And it's always stuff like that. I mean, I use prophecy as an example, but it's always vague stuff in the Bible that can be, interpreted any way you want it. And God, the thing is, I've always, when people say that God is the truth, or the Bible is the truth, God is the ultimate truth, and it's just funny that if God is, for being the ultimate truth, you can't get a straight answer out of him.
No, not at all.
At all,
No, it literally is, don't. It literally is the Wizard of Oz. Don't look at that man behind the curtain.
Right. And you can't blame people, who lived in a pre-modern era for trying their best to explain reality as trying to understand reality and using their own myths and stuff. It's what is inexcusable is when people who definitely should know better.
Right. And I have to say that I think for at least 400 or 500 years, people should have known better. I may be a little bit less sympathetic to people even in the 19th or the 18th century who were passionate believers than certainly today. But in the Middle Ages, when we had just really horrifically low literacy rates.
Yeah.
But certainly within the last century, what we fail to remember or fail to remind ourselves enough, the Bible is the #1 bestseller of all time.
Still.
I mean, and its sales are just gargantuan compared to Roget's Thesaurus or Merriam-Webster's dictionary. It blows out the Quran, in ways that, in terms of total sales are just phenomenal. And so what's astounding, really what it kind of tells you is that there are probably just a grossly disproportionate purchases of the Bible versus people who actually read it. Because it's like in Chairman Mao's book is a #1 bestseller in a certain genre, but I'm confident that most of those peasants who bought that book wanted it on their coffee table, so that when the Red Guard came in, they could say, "Hey, we're on the same team."
When you die, if you don't have it, that's an incentive to get it.
Right. But that's certainly not adequate reason to read it.
No, and it doesn't necessarily attest to the quality of the content at all.
Wherever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.